I'm hoping that you can see my bio information and my title. That's the short version of my title is joins. The long version of my title is why the query optimizer might not give you the kind of join you asked for. I don't like slides. I prefer to talk into the camera like I'm doing now. So let's go with that. Somebody says it looks good to them. So let's work with that. So when I think about joins, there's all kinds of joins I think about. I think about inner joins. I think about left joins. I think about right joins down there. I think about full joins, if I can make that display on the screen. I think about cross joins. I think about semi. I think about anti-semi. Now, these two are like where exists, and this one's like a where not exists, right? But they're just still join types that you might write in a query about the way that you interact between two tables. So you've got your base table, and then you do a join. It might be a semi-join, it might be an inner join, a right join, whatever, to another table. And I want to talk about what's going on here and why the query optimizer might decide to actually swap another one out for you. Now, there is another one that I kind of mentioned, which is the lookup join. It's not a real one, but for the purposes of my, I've got to find somewhere to look through the words. For the purpose of my presentation, I'm going to talk about the impacts that joins have and why I think lookup is actually kind of important. So yeah, we know, of course, that sometimes we ask for a left join and it actually gives us an inner join. I'll talk about why that is, but I'm sure you've all experienced that and you go, oh, hang on, that's because I'm using that thing later on and it means can't have nulls, so actually I may as well use an inner join. We'll look at that and a few others, right? But yeah, no demos, I'm just going to talk to you here. I'm going to write on the screen, see how we go. I'll make words appear like I have done. We'll see how we go. So there are 4 things that I think that joins do. If you've heard me give a similar talk to this before, you'll know what those 4 things are, I hope. Those 4 things are that you can fetch columns from the other tables. Now, of course, this is typically why we do a join. It's because there's something that we want to reference and it's in another table. So we join to it and we go, yeah, that column over there, right? And I'm particularly meaning columns that are not necessarily part of what we're putting into the on clause. I'm meaning something that we're using as select, right? Something that we're actually returning in the result set from the join operator, because that's really where this comes into play. It's about what's happening with the join operator and why we see that the logical join type, and in this talk, because it's 10 minutes, I'm not going to talk about physical join types. No mention of merge join except right now, hash match, nested loop, not mentioning them at all. That's another talk, not this one. But yeah, fetching columns that come, the things that are output from that join operator heading off to the left, fetching columns. Another one is that we might see duplicate copies of of rows from our base tables. We might say that because the one impact of the join, if we match multiple rows on the other side, we'll see duplicate copies of those rows coming through. So duplicating, that's another thing that a join does. Another one, as I'm sure you'll know, is that we see rows get eliminated from our base table. And now, and I'm really running out of space for my face here, but you know, and of course we don't see this on a left join, but we do see it on an inner join. I'll come back to that, as I said before. The 4th one is kind of a bit obscure, and that's about being able to put null rows into our result set. The idea being that if we've done, for example, a right join, if there are things in that right-hand table that are not in our base table, we're going to put extra rows into our base table to be able to cater for that. If we're doing a right join, that's what we want, but there's going to be an impact on our base table, right? So anyway, remembering these 4, let's think again about our join types that we had, right? So these join types, I want to link them up with those 4 uses. So let me quickly put them in the corner in another color just to differentiate them. I've got columns, I've got duplicating, I've got filtering, and I've got the nulls, right? You can see that okay? I hope. If you can't, resize your screen, because I promise you it's coming through the webcam, right? Now, let's think about what's going on with this. We know that if we're doing a left join, for example, the left join makes columns available, sure. It might duplicate stuff. It's not putting nulls in, And we know that it's not filtering either, right? So this can have effect 1 and effect 2, right? Now, if we think about, as a comparison, our inner join, if we think about what's going on here, we're accessing the columns, we're duplicating, but the inner join is also filtering. It's not putting the nulls in. So this is 1, 2, and 3. Now, if our query is doing filtering somewhere else, like in the where clause or whatever, then it might already be filtering that in a way that's compatible. Like if we're filtering out from our left, then the impact might be that it says, well, you know what, I may as well do an inner join here because the impact is the same on the logical correctness of my query. And so it might say, oh, well, you asked for left, but I'll give you an inner join instead, right? If I carry on here, we see that, for example, a semi-join and, in fact, an anti-semi-join, they don't duplicate anything. They don't make columns available. They don't introduce nulls. They just filter. There's the clue for that. We write it as a where exists or where not exists. It's only doing that one there. And, of course, if it's not doing that even because we've miswritten the clause, well, you know, we might not even have a join at all. I'll come back to that. We see the right join, which introduces nulls, which can duplicate, which can filter, which can give us access to other columns. That does every possible thing that a join could do. It's the only one, because let's face it, the full join doesn't filter, but could if we have a where clause in play. You know, a cross join, it just makes lots of copies of everything, assuming that there's a row on the other side. Now, the reason why I mentioned this one called a lookup is because if the only thing that we're doing, and if the query optimizer can tell that the only thing that we're doing is accessing columns on the other side, if we're not doing dupes, if we're not doing filters, if we're not introducing nulls, and of course we can't write lookup, that means that we're implementing these things in other ways. For example, by joining on something which is unique on the right-hand side, so it can only hook into one row at max, and it can't make extra copies of things. If we have a lookup join, then we know that the data coming through our base table is completely protected. We know that the number of rows, that the sum of the sales, and all of those things are protected when we are doing transforms and so on, and ending up with data that we're using in a report, in a warehouse, or whatever. And I think that is critically important to being able to trust data. Now, the way that I check to see, is this having any other impact? Is there any possibility that the query optimizer can see that means this is not just a lookup join, is that I stop referring to those columns? Because if it's not doing any of these, then there's another one, which I don't have in text, but I'm just going to write in here, which is redundant. That says redundant. I apologize for my writing. It says redundant. If we're not doing any of these things, then in fact the join disappears, and we just are querying the main table, and it's got an arrow straight into the select or into other transforms that are going on, right? And I think that is critically important. But the main principle here is understand which of these four are going on, and then understand that the query optimizer can use that to be able to give you something else. If you thought you were asking for a semi, and it says, actually, I think I could give you an inner join for that, it might. If you're asking for a left join, but the way that you're filtering it or doing distinct or whatever, it just goes, actually, you just mean semi, it might give you a semi join. Understand that the query optimizer just looks at what the function is and then works it out itself rather than giving you the one that it necessarily asked for. That's 10 minutes. I'm done. Thanks, Ben.